I think it's a good time to talk about the process that we get people in the schools to follow. It's an iteration over, it's taken, I guess, a couple of years to come to the place that we're at now. And I think we've certainly seen the greatest change and impact happen over the last 12 months, which has been really good. Did you want to add anything, Annalie, just about the development of, the amount of structure we put in for people over the years and how that's differed?
Well, yeah. So that first year was far less structured. It was, in the end, we thought too flexible, so that schools didn't really have enough guidance with, particularly how to enact their goals. So we thought if we can really structure it a little bit more, and it's been, because every term we review what has resonated with schools, what worked and what didn't. So I think the scaffolding's there to support them. There's still lots of opportunity for flexibility, particularly in terms of what schools want to focus on and their actions, how they want to enact. But I think the scaffold's been really good for creating opportunities to be, really effective in conversation and in action.
Yeah.
In the workshops.
Yeah, and I guess we use a series of steps through that process, but then scaffolded in very clear templates, very specific questions to support the inquiry and support the questioning, to help leaders really get to the point and work out what they needed to do and what they were going to do and where the gaps were, and then to be able to reflect on the impact and whether or not it had worked. So I think it's
the templates are both the agenda, but then there's also been the kind of formatting options, data formatting templates that you've given some schools, and Gantt charts and those kind of things that provide that that support in between.
Yeah. And I mean, in my work, I really believe that, in some ways we've got to treat our teachers like we teach students. Like if we're saying to people, we want you to be involved in the research cycle, and they don't know what that looks like or what success looks like, we're actually supporting them by providing that clarity for them. And I think that's what we've done, and it's evolved over time, but it's super clear what they're going to be doing in those meetings every time they come. They get access to those questions beforehand, so they can look over it and prep. But
which some really enjoy doing and some don't. But again, there's the flexibility there, and that's, I think, compared to that first year where we did make some assumptions about what leadership was able to do regarding setting goals and enacting them. So this has been far more supportive. It's not too directive, but it's allowing some very clear, explicit processes, but also goal setting.
Yeah, for sure.
And we've noticed the change in how they're goal setting as a result.
Yeah, that it's definitely more refined, and and they can talk to their impact so much more explicitly.
That's been a huge change, I think. That initially it might have been, we want to change this. And that was kind of, so it was always aspirational, theoretical, hypothetical, but now it's coming back and reviewing both the impact of the actions, but also long term the impact of the goal on student outcomes.
Yeah. So the way we've set it up is that there are 4 meetings in a year. So term 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've had a bit of a mix of hybrid in person, but generally they seem to work better in person, and the schools have given us feedback that they like being in a room with other people and hearing from them and being able to kind of unpack the challenges and what they're trying and the impact and all of that.
And so, physically in the room with their teams as well, their executive teams.
Yeah, true. So it's not just the principal, not just the deputy, it's the people who are leading the change process in the school. So we've got 4 different templates. There's a beginning one in term 1, there's a final one in term 4 as a wrap up. The term 2 and 3 templates are much the same because they're coming back and reviewing where they're at and making tweaks to their action research project. And so in between those 4 meetings, obviously there's an expectation that the staff are going back to their schools and they're doing the work and they're implementing the program. So we're just going to talk through, I guess, each one of those meetings just to give a bit of context about what they are. In term 1, we meet, as we said, so at any of these meetings, it's fully templated, prompting questions, and they're given time to work on answering them and having the conversations and being able to reflect.
And sharing with the other groups.
And share, yeah, absolutely. The first piece is around obviously mapping the school goal and having a think about what they need to be focusing on in that year.
And that would come from, at that point, would ideally have at least a draft annual school improvement plan. So it would be one of those goals, I think.
Yeah.
And that second step of considering the baseline data was new last year because we, again, recognised that wasn't always happening in the ASIC, that they weren't going to the data.
Yeah, and, you know, one of the things we've relied on heavily has been the Victoria Bernhardt model of multiple measures of data, and we're often really good at having great baseline data for academic results or for demographics. But the things that start to shift really clearly in this, and we've seen so much change in, has been the process and perceptions circles in her model.
And that's also provided real affirmation that there is a shift that may not, you know, halfway through the year, that may not be evident in academic data, but is evident in culture.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've got to go really hard on that baseline data early on because we're not very good at collecting it, and then we often kind of forget where we were. And so processes evolve through the year, and we remember where we're at now, or we know where we're at now, but we're not necessarily good at going back and reflecting on the change that's taken place. So I think as we've gotten to learn more about what they need, we've gone much, much harder on that baseline piece.
Yep.
So obviously, you know, through all of this, there's been professional learning kind of activities and prompts and some of the training piece that's kind of just merged in with it. So around the baseline data, we were obviously encouraging them to collect multiple measures of data from the different aspects of the Victoria Bernhardt model. We've talked about qualitative and quantitative data, but encourage them also to make sure that they're triangulating. So they're looking at the data that's going to give them the best information about that area of inquiry, the focus area for them, and, you know, encourage them, I guess, to collect it and go out and actively find it if they didn't have the information.
And there's with members from the teaching and learning team to support them in being able to achieve that as well. I think that's, you know, important because it connects the education officers to their goals so that they can check in on them. That also guide them a little bit. Oh, well, have you thought about this? What's your data say about that?
Yeah. And the good thing about having a system as small as yours is that most of your education officers have worked in many different schools in your system. So it's good because it's
got a good overall picture of all the schools.
So they understand the context really well. We get them to reflect on their current reality. So we get them to kind of think about why that particular phenomenon is happening and get them kind of unpacking the reasons why that thing might not have worked in the past, or why, say, reading comprehension.
Yeah, why they're getting the results that they're not happy with.
Yeah, because again, and that was kind of more of a recent inclusion, wasn't it? Because we kind of found that they weren't unpacking all the possible reasons. Like there was almost sometimes a bit of a cause and effect, quite fast thinking.
And therefore to come up with, you know, just to say, I want to improve this, you can't really be effective in understanding how to improve it if you haven't understood why it didn't work. That's what we were thinking about last year, that, again, there wasn't that reflection on the why it wasn't working in the first place.
Yeah.
Why they were getting that result. And if they don't consider that, you're just kind of pulling out random actions, aren't you? Or random goals even, really.
Yeah, for sure. So that's kind of almost slowing down their thinking in that piece around what are all the possible reasons and then connecting actions. And then so the final part of that meeting is really that they start to then create the action plan. So once they've thought about the goal, come up with the baseline, thought about why the baseline data is as it is, they then start to kind of plan out those really tangible and deliberate actions and what's happening when and who in the community. And
again, we scaffolded that more over the years, didn't we? Like initially it was kind of, you know, a bit of a to-do list almost, you know, for them to go away and come back, but being more precise allows them more opportunity for success, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Or
failure, depending on how it works.
And exactly, and we've learned from all of those as well, right?
Yeah.
Intelligent failure, like Amy Edmondson talks about. when they go back to school, so they leave the meetings and there's 2 steps that they're working on in that time in between the meetings. So obviously they're going to be implementing the action plan, but while they're also implementing it, they need to be monitoring the impact. So the idea would be that when they come back to us in term 2, they've got some evidence of impact. And one of the things we started talking to them about last year was, your actions and the things you're doing is not your impact. And so how do we talk to the impact on like those Victoria Bernhardt aspects of probably not going to be student learning in between terms 1 and 2, but what process and perception shifts are you starting to see? And so they're able to kind of come with that information to the term 2 meeting to then reflect on what's been happening. So term 2 meeting then happens, and there's 3 steps that happen in this one. They analyse the impact. So because they've been doing the work in schools and identify in a perfect world collecting evidence of impact, they're able to reflect on that and analyse kind of where is it working, where's it not working. We often know that change processes and projects work for some young people at some times and not others, and some staff members sometimes and not others, and there's rapid change in some areas of the school and not others. And so we kind of get them to think about almost different groups and their different experience within the overall impact, rather than saying, we've had an impact or not.
Yeah, and that changed quite a bit too, didn't it, last year? So before that, there were more action steps, really, wasn't there? And we recognised through the conversations and just the thought processes for the groups when they came back that reflective component was absolutely essential. Again, not something if it's not explicitly given the time, they don't get to do. So they come in and we're like, here's the time to really review and reflect and revise.
And so many of them have shared that they're really grateful for that time.
And some do a big about turn. They're like, well, that did not work.
Yeah.
We need to reconsider all of this.
Yeah.
I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. But they don't, and, as we've kind of said, they don't seem to have the time and space in school.
No.
Those people uninterrupted, free from distractions, to be able to kind of think bigger and kind of think about strategy, I guess, and broader school improvement, because they're so busy in the day-to-day.
And again, it comes back, it's not really always going to the why. So some will say, that hasn't had the impact we wanted it to, but really going, why is that?
Yeah.
And because, again, you can't really make effective change if you haven't considered what's not working. So that's been really exciting. And, again, hearing each other, because it creates this space of being open to that, open to saying it's not working the way we want it to work. We need to do something else.
Yeah, so they kind of share, don't they, in both? So there's kind of 2 key pieces, but then they share back for both of them. So they share back around what impact they feel they've had. And I've been really impressed just with the openness and vulnerability of the leaders in the room to share that. And I think it's almost they've created that really safe space for themselves and for one another, because there's no judgment. It's just, it is what it is. They're all really keen to learn. They're curious. You have such a great group of leaders, but it's just a really nice collaborative sharing opportunity where people then they're asking questions of other schools after they've shared, and they're some of them are kind of partnering if their goals or focus areas are quite similar. It's been really great to see that. As we said in the other recording, it's a really lovely unintended impact or kind of byproduct of what we.
Yeah, it's collaborative change management.
Yeah.
That because they feel comfortable now asking each other, what did you do for that, or how did you get staff on board? It's often that question, isn't it?
Yeah, leadership related change, like leading change.
Leading change, yeah.
And it's almost, I was just thinking, it's almost like elevating the collective to teach efficacy just from one school but across schools, because it's bringing them together with shared and similar kind of challenges and processes, and obviously some very similar contexts. And
again, that collaborative culture is transferring to schools. Like I said, where leadership are working more closely with their staff. Whereas, I think it was a culture not just for our system but across the board, where you'd have the exec team making the decisions, telling the staff that was the decision, and then the staff not necessarily engaging with it. Whereas now they're, as I said, they've just worked with this school who were had a staff meeting to nut out how do we action these goals that we, recommendations from the SIT, how do we action those goals, and what do we want the impact to look like? Mm-hmm. So that, that it's changing. I think this has had an impact on the way leaders work.
Yeah, they see themselves really as learners, don't they?
Or just being part of the team. Like it's not just the exec team, but the whole staff's the team.
And I also love, as a bit of a side note, there's a couple of schools now there that have taken this process that we've been using with them, and they're essentially running a version of it, a modified version in their schools. Teams running very similar kind of action research processes, which is so they analyse the impacts of the plan so far, or the action so far, and then they share back. And then the second kind of key part is that they then reflect, refine, and adjust the action plan. So they look at what they had written in term one, they kind of take into consideration the impact and the change that's taken place so far, and then they go and kind of tweak those actions and make modifications. What we also know is that people kind of come to us, and this is true not just in your system, but in lots of places that I work, but they come and go, oh, I haven't really done much since we were together last. And then they go back and look at the term one documentation and what they'd written, and they're like, oh, actually, we've done this and this and this and this, and it's really...
That's actually huge, isn't it? So again, it's the time. Yeah, you're right. That sort of, they can't see, when you're in it, you can't see.
Yeah.
So to come back and step away and have somebody support you in analysing it, really.
Yeah. And to be able to go back,
really affirming.
Yeah, and to go back and look at what they'd written 3 months ago and go, oh, we are actually making progress.
Yes.
We have been moving forward. Because that's the other thing we do each time. We get them to open the previous term's document template and get them to kind of think about what they'd written there, and then kind of transfers over.
Yeah.
They then start to kind of plan what tweaks they're making, and then come up with that kind of refined action plan then for the next couple of months. And then again, then they share that again with the group. So they talk to what they're planning to do. And obviously then the really nice thing as well about having the education officers and other support kind of staff in the room is that a lot of them are leaning on those people. Like they're leaning on your EALD specialists. They're leaning on Rachel in like data analytics and dashboard. Like they're leaning on curriculum.
And people who, the head officer to support, EALD data.
Yeah.
Numeracy, you're right. And it's also because we do a bit of a summary as well at the end of each term, so that we know just roughly what schools are working on to be able to say, how are you going with this? So yeah.
Absolutely. So after term 2 meeting, they go away back to school, and they're doing the same actions as previously. So the two things are they're implementing obviously the actions and they're doing the work, and then they're monitoring the impact and collecting evidence of the impact that they've had. Term 3. What's that, sorry?
And then term 3,
yeah. So then they come back in term 3, and term 3 is actually exactly the same as term 2, the structure of the meeting, because they need to analyse the impact of what's been happening so far, and then they're refining, reflecting, adjusting the action plan for the following couple of months.
And again, that was something we discussed at the end of the year before last, at the end of 23, really, that rather than, again, giving them something new to do, to come back and really stick with what they had planned to do, to have that reflective component.
Yeah. And also in that term 3 session, in 23, we added in a bit of NAPLAN work because the NAPLAN new metrics, the metrics had changed in 23, and we've done some PAT work, and we've kind of just each time just put in a bit of professional learning in the aspects that we kind of have felt that they've needed at the time. So term 3 meeting, and then they go back, and then the at school piece is the same as well. So they're implementing the action plan and monitoring the impact. So they come back together in term 4 for the final meeting, and obviously this is the kind of wrap up and finalising the project for the year. They reflect on that post data. So they reflect on the data that has been collected about the impact that they've had in all of those actions. They're obviously not just thinking about it from the last 3 months, they're starting to look now more longitudinally over the year to go, well, where were we when we started, and where are we now? So that's one step. They then determine and share the impacts of the action plan. So they talk about the overall impact on students, staff, parents, guardians, the school community. And it's been really nice where we've seen a range of different schools talk to impact in all of those different ways. Like the schools on Tiwi talk about the community impacts really well, which is, brilliant. It's just such a great room to be in that term 4 when people are sharing and telling great stories about all the positive things that have happened.
And I guess also to be always relating it back to teaching and learning, to say, well, if you've improved this, it's connecting kids more to class, which yes is improving attendance, but it's also improving their education outcomes because they're in class more. Or so, facilitating that discussion to say, well, you can have a focus on this, but ultimately it comes back to quality teaching and learning to ensure that, student growth is at the centre. And there's lots of different ways to target that, depending on the kind of school, like the type of school, because they're so diverse.
Yeah, for sure. So then the final bit of this is that we get them to think about, well, what have they learned? So as leaders, so there's 2 pieces. There's the reflection.
And that's new, that step. That was new last year, wasn't it? Yeah, really exciting.
I think it was in there the year before, but we didn't focus on it as much as last year. I think we got much better information from them last year because we were so much more explicit.
Yeah, and the year before, it was a focus on the outcomes because, again, it was, a new kind of process. So we focused on the success, which is great, just the process and what schools had achieved. And that was shared back at the Principals Network. We identified a few to share their stories that were very different. But then, last year to reflect on the team's learning was a different focus. Instead of sharing back regarding the outcomes or the impact, they shared their learnings. And that was really exciting to have at the Principals Network too.
Yeah, because it's about them as well, right? Building their capacity as leaders and leading change and leading people. And, a lot of them are introducing like new reading programs and they're tracking data in different ways. And, it's not an easy job. They're leading epic change in their schools. So it was nice to kind of listen to them talk to what they've learned. I guess the only final little bit then is that in that meeting we just then encourage them to start to think about the following year. So we start knowing what they know and knowing how far they've come and what's happened in that particular year. We then start them thinking about the following year's annual school improvement plan, like how does this learning inform next year. And I think about probably one of the best examples of that, again, I go to Tiwi, but that example of they started collecting really good behaviour and attendance data in 1 year, and they ended up getting really great records around behaviour incidences, and they could see really clear patterns. And then when the new principal came in, they made changes to timetabling in the following year, and then they tracked the impact of that. And that actually went into their annual school improvement plan for the following year, and it was really successful.
Yeah, and a lot of them have had like a part 2 component. So likewise for the primary school on Tiwi, that they had this big focus on collecting their EALD data effectively, just having clean data. Yeah. And so that meant step 2 was, okay, they've got a data wall and now they've targeted staff meetings to have collective data cycles, collaborative data cycles to analyse that data to moderate. So that is a huge thing for this year, based on really a lot of work last year. And I just think the combination of those 2 years are really exciting. So I like that some schools wanted to go, okay, we've done this, so now here's part 2.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's such massive goals and we know that they're having an impact, but it's not something that is after 12 months, like signed off and done, and you're ticking a box and going, okay, we can move on to the next thing. Almost, I think, I'm struggling to think of a school where this isn't the case, but I'm thinking almost every school, there's been an evolution of where they almost started 3 years ago, but it's been refined, it's been modified, it's been the next step. Like there's a very clear progression year to year as to where they've gone. They haven't gone, 1 year we're going to focus on EALD, and then the next year we're going to focus on reporting or whatever it might be. It's been a really nice
continuum. And it does align really well with the work we're doing with Sharon, like the Learning Alliance. So again, that has tapped in and supported people in understanding what they'd like to target.
Yeah.
So, again, for the primary school integrity, that they've gone, okay, well, this is what we want to focus on. We've got the data now to be able to do it. So I think it's been a nice, combination.
Yeah, sure.